Thank you very much. This was going to be a project thing, but I've been sitting here listening to what people say, so I'm going to briefly semi-abuse the bully pulpit in the direction of the project. Fi3P is not a research project in the sense that the other ones are. It's connected with the Future Internet Public-Private Partnership activities, and it is supportive of what we hope will be an impact assessment of those activities in their future incarnation. Now, just for people who don't know the landscape here, an impact assessment or an ex-ante evaluation is something that is mandatory in advance of actually putting something into practice. And it generally proceeds on the basis that you know what the problem is, you know what the objectives are, you know what the options are, the preferred option and the other option, which always must include doing nothing, and then you map out a certain set of impacts, think about what they might be and what might cause them to vary, and on the basis of that, make a recommendation for choosing an option and for evaluating and monitoring the effects as they unfold. Fi3P is a little bit different than that, but of course it was always going to be because it is a public-private partnership, which means it is not wholly within the gift of the sponsoring organization, in this case the European Commission. Moreover, some of the future Internet public-private partnership activities are already in progress. They began earlier this year, and those include projects to develop the core platform or a core platform to be dropped into the mix of the future Internet with a small f and a small I, as compared to the one with the big F and the big I. And several use cases, which will be some but not all of the use cases that will be taken forward under some other vehicle under FP8 or under the Comprehensive Strategic Framework. Anyway, something happening in about 2014. And in the next call, something that will contribute to the infrastructure, physical infrastructure elaboration over which this stuff is going to run. Now, in thinking about this, it became necessary to differentiate the future Internet with the big F and the big I from the one with the little f and the little I. Namely, the one with the little f and the little I is a not branded future Internet, it's the real Internet, but of course it's not a future Internet because the Internet is not a static thing that is replaced by something else. It is a process, we need to understand the process. So what we did in the project, just to give you a quick capsule on that, is that we began by making an assessment of the current state of the European Internet economy, sector, and industry. And I won't rehearse the details of this. The reports are available if you'd like to see them. But basically, you begin by doing a definitional struggle. Where is the Internet? And those of you who've seen the Boston Consulting Group report on the economic impacts of the Internet on the British economy, or the series of McKinsey reports starting with the French economy and then working out more globally, will know that the numbers you attach to this can vary hugely from not very big and very internal to almost everything, depending on how well you separate the Internet from ICTs and how closely you focus on those sectors most directly implicated in the Internet. But as an empirical matter, you have a big problem in attributing things to the Internet or not. If I were looking at BT, for example, a large part of what they do is connected with the Internet, either directly by providing Internet services or providing a platform over which the Internet runs, but so do many other things run. And so breaking down the joint costs and the joint benefits is a matter of art. Now, moreover, the same thing happens if I say, what is the European Internet? I mean, that's almost an oxymoronic statement, the European Internet. It doesn't belong to a country, it doesn't belong to a region, and that's why we have this problem and why we care about it. On the other hand, the network of people layered on top of the technical networks and the service Internet does involve Europeans and their individual, community, and collective cultures. And therefore, there is a sense in which just as communities may be European in following a particular social or economic model, so too the Internet that they inhabit, the services they demand and are given, may also have a more European or less European character. Now, the same thing's true if we look at other nations. You may notice a touch of American in my voice. I'm a multiple national. Many people say that the internet and the dominance, the sort of tipping equilibrium dominance of large firms based in America has given a kind of American cast, certainly an English language cast, to the global internet. But it's not really American. It is now global. It emerged from America. It no longer represents a particularly American perspective. It is, however, a global perspective and is developing its own particular character. So there was an accounting problem, let's say. But nonetheless, we soldiered on and developed the measures that we have of what was going on in that economy. And the results will not be terribly surprising. They're numerically roughly consistent with what you might expect from the definitions. But two things did come out of it that I think are worth remembering from a European perspective and in terms of European interests. The first is that a lot of the action is in terms of the evolution of new services and in the evolution of new business models. And in both of those respects, Europe is relatively weak. Well, no, they are weak. We don't have a lot of innovative new business models. They propagate here, they find root, and they develop further, but they tend not to originate here. And it's not a matter of SMEs versus large firms. It is a matter of culture, and in particular business culture, as we know from John van Reenen and colleagues' work at the LSE, that if you have a multinational enterprise which happened to originate in the United States, it gets more productivity out of its ICT investment than a multinational enterprise which originated elsewhere or a national enterprise after you have controlled for everything else that an economist might be able to measure. And this has to do with flexibility and delegation. It has to do with the layer and levels and nature of trust. And it has to do with the way in which technology and practice, hard and soft innovation, if you like, feed off into one another. Now, a similar thing is true with services. I mean, it's not really about Bill talked about in the propagation world, propping up an obsolete business model. Well, if you look at where the money is made in the European internet economy, and if you take money as the measure of the economy, although much of the value creation is not monetized, and much of the monetized stuff is more about value capture than value creation, if you look, the biggest footprint comes with the large telcos, because the large telcos own the backbone, and the large telcos are politically influential. And the large telcos, of course, wish to preserve their role at the center of this internet. Although new telecommunications technologies and the movement of the center of action away from the transport of signal to the content of the signal and the social interactions mediated by that signal would suggest that they might gracefully fade into the background. So the question about who are the major stakeholders within this and whether their persistence is a matter of Schumpeterian dominance, that you just propagate from yesterday's monopoly to tomorrow's, oligopoly, or whether there really is a functional reason why it should be locked up in the networks itself, is a question we may begin to ask when the economy and the polity come together. But nonetheless, basically there is one, maybe two large global European players in the services space, and that presumably will need to change if Europe is going to remain, or if Europe is going to play a significant role in that part of the network. There are other things I could say about that, but I just want to say a bit about where we are in the project at the moment, because we moved beyond the assessment of the status quo ante and began to consider what happens into the future. So what we did was we used a large macroeconomic model. One tends to do that to try to get macroeconomic impacts out of things that happen on the internet, despite the measurement difficulties and despite the fact that many of the economic impacts and the social impacts that follow from those occur in other sectors that are not directly implicated, but come as a result of the internet's slight intervention in changing the relative speed or the relative reach with which things happen. A simple example that may be persuasive is machine trading in financial markets. Right? Financial markets are critical to the development of the internet because capital flows to some parts and not to others. But of course, at the same time, how those markets operate, how they collect together information, aggregate it, and price the associated risks, depends on how these things interact. And what we found is that machine trading does two things. The first thing that it does is that it allows the use of much more sophisticated models. So now we're talking about creating new derivatives, doing very sophisticated forms of analysis. Instead of the market being a way of mobilizing the wisdom of crowds, in which relatively uninformed people interact on the basis of local information and some brighter idea is emergent at the whole system level, what we have now are much smarter people interacting, and the wisdom of crowds doesn't always work quite the same way. This kind of highly wired and highly agile and highly smart crowd can panic in new and interesting ways. The other thing that happens is that the speed of transaction accelerates enormously. And there are two consequences of that. The first is to do with the informational efficiency of the market. If I know something particular, if I have an idea, whether it's in the financial markets or in the real technology markets, I have a brief window of time before people realize what that is. During that window of time, I'm a monopolist and I can get a return. And that return may be enough to keep me innovating and to encourage me to share that idea by using it. And the rest of the world can then see it. If, on the other hand, you've got a high-speed trading program that will take the consequences of my idea in a nanosecond, then I no longer have quite the same incentive to bring my idea through into the public space. So it can actually change the ways in which people communicate and whether they communicate. The other part is to do with the fragmentation that we've already heard about. That if you have high-speed programs and you have governance or regulation mechanisms that operate very quickly in relation to local conditions, they may interact through what is, after all, a complex system with all the emergent behavior, synchronization, and self-organized movement towards the boundary of disruptive change that implies. The flash crash of a year ago this April in the United States was an example of that. You had two circuit breaker rules that were slightly out of sync, and one circuit breaker rule thought the other one was a market movement, and 1,000-point drop in a matter of seconds. Well, this kind of thing makes people nervous, and when people become nervous, they use these interactive systems in different ways, the same as with privacy. So, what have we done in the project? We've made projections into the future based on our assumptions about how the future public-private partnership will unfold. That means projecting into the future the focal areas of the current actions, the 8 use cases in the core platform, and what it means for openness and connectivity, assuming that it will be carried forward in the years to come. Because in the 2 years between now and, well, 2 and a bit, between now and 2014, not much will probably happen, so the real results are further out. And we then modeled different scenarios of the world in terms of connectivity, in terms of the relative roles of public and private partners and other stakeholders, and in terms of the development of the economy. And we found there are very significant effects, but not all of them go in the direction that we intended. And one of the things that happens, just to conclude, is that if the future internet economy, on the back of these publicly sponsored developments, generates new amounts of income, and there's greater disposable income, let's say, within the European community, it is not guaranteed that that income will be spent in buying products from that same European community, particularly if the tipping tendency of the internet economy means that we become relatively specialized in certain areas. Then we will buy other things. And so it may be that much of the economic development that we induce occurs on a broader scale. Okay, there's much more that I can say, but I've abused your patience enough. And the slides, I guess, will be available, all the slides that I didn't talk about.
Okay, thanks very much. So we have time for maybe one question while we switch computers. You'll have another opportunity to ask Jonathan lots of questions.
Just one, but I can pack several in just one question. Thanks. Quickly, when Fi3P stopped, in fact, the project, and what is the potential interaction with the PPP program as such? Do you have an intersection point, and how do you foresee that?
Yes, well, in the process of doing what we've done, we have made active connections with the future internet communities of interest. So that means that we are in contact with participants in the current PPP activities, also the FIA, the Future Internet Assembly, and FIF and FIRE communities. Mm-hmm. And so we're not going to go away. Moreover, the model and the modeling platform and the analytical framework that we've created, we are prepared to transpose, help in the application of, and sell, market,
Okay.
to almost everyone.
I know a bit what is expected in terms of impact assessment from a commission point of view with a report and a lot of tables and so on. Your project will provide, let's say, quantification and values and answers to the different questions? Or?
Oh, sorry, that was the bit that I didn't quite get to. In order to do that, two things need to be in place. One of them is the objectives, a clear statement of the objectives, and another is a clear statement of the options. And we've made recommendations based on the succession of documents. There was a time early on when it looked like it would be a European an EIP, and then it looked like it might be one of the flagships coming out of Innovation Union. What we're trying to do is to build an impact assessment framework, which is capable of rendering the differences between those in such a way that as and when the details become evident, it can feed into a more soundly based and concise impact assessment in the collective sense.
Okay, so you are working on the framework for the impact assessment. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, right, because a PPP is a very different kind of thing. Just as self and co-regulation in earlier work that we did is very different. So how to do impact assessment in the right spirit is a challenge.
Okay, you'll have more opportunities to talk to us later today.